For more on this, we're now being joined by Ben Aris, founder and editor-in-chief of BNE Intelli News. He's joining us live from Berlin. Mr. Aris is also a former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph, and he now has his correspondents fanned out across Moscow, gathering the latest from what is happening in Russia. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Mr. Aris.
Pleasure.
Now, Mr. Aris, the Wagner chief has agreed to go to Belarus after calling off the rebellion. The deal was brokered by Belarus, but the pertinent question being right now is that whether the truce will hold or withstand the uprisings that has been taking place in Russia.
I think absolutely it will hold. Prigozhin, launched this shocking attack and took, without any opposition, control of Rostov-on-Don, which is the headquarters of Russia's southern military district. So this is a key city. The Ukraine campaign, the Russian campaign, is being run from Rostov. It's also a major arms depot and airfields there, which are flying sorties into Ukraine. So the Kremlin wants this city back. And the problem that the Kremlin faced was that with 25,000 troops Prigozhin had, that once he's inside the city, it'd be very, very difficult to get him out. And so the Kremlin side was very keen to have a deal. But from Prigozhin's side, then his problem was that it doesn't go anywhere, that he's been demanding that Putin sacks the defense minister. And there was talk of columns from Wagner going up to Moscow, but again, Moscow is a huge, well-defended city, and so forcing the Kremlin's hand is also not really an option. So Prigozhin was kind of stuck. He'd made his statement, he got everybody's attention, but he needed a way out of this situation. And so Lukashenko came in and brokered a deal. I think Prigozhin's quite happy to accept that deal, and I have no doubt that he will now leave for Minsk. And the Wagner troops, the Kremlin's already said they're dropping all the charges. And for those that didn't participate in the March on Moscow, they're being offered contracts to join the regular army, which I think they will also accept.
Right, Mr. Aris, you've been covering Russia since 1993. Talk to us about, with whatever is happening in Russia, what lies ahead for Putin and Prigozhin now that the rebellion has been called off?
I think we go back to business as normal. The Wagner troops have played a key role, but since the Kharkiv offensive in September, which was a spectacular success for Ukraine, the regular army has been taking a largely defensive position, and they've been preparing for the counteroffensive that has started a few weeks ago, digging, extensive and sophisticated defenses. As far as the offensive fighting, the actual attacks, that's all been on Wagner. Wagner has been fighting for Bakhmut in a battle that went on for 8 months at huge costs of life on both sides, but particularly the Russian side. And Bakhmut fell. That's now in Russian hands. But then Wagner has sort of lost its role because it's not being used elsewhere. It was specifically in this one fight. So Shoigu, the defense minister, moved to take the Wagner troops into the regular army. He said by July 1st, they had to sign a contract, which was what provoked this whole confrontation, because in effect, Shoigu was taking over Prigozhin's army, his personal private army that he set up. And he wasn't happy about that, but he was given no choice. And consequently, he acted, this spectacular assault on Rostov. But now it's been resolved. The Ukrainians are expected to come with a hammer blow. We haven't seen their main forces in the field yet. And so the Russian military, the defense military, is trying to shore up its troops. And this is one of the reasons why they wanted to take these veterans, these battle-hardened Wagner troops, into the regular army in order to bolster their defenses even more.
Right, Mr. Aris, you speak of how normal, usual business will return in Russia and that the Wagner mercenaries will now join the Russian army. But let's also talk about how Putin, in a televised address just yesterday, he vowed to punish the mutineers. But now a deal has been struck and the Wagner chief Prigozhin is en route Belarus. Talk to us more on that.
Yeah, there's a long tradition in the military of once you defeat a force, then you subsume and take those fighters into your own army. And the political consequences of this are still difficult to work out what exactly the impact of this is going to have, because it made Putin look incredibly weak in so much as, without any opposition, Wagner walked into the main city in the south, Rostov, and then apparently with very little opposition managed to get within 200 kilometers of Moscow. And so Putin suddenly doesn't look as if he's as strong as he pretends to be, doesn't look as if he's as in charge of the situation as we thought he was. And all of that can undermine his position. And the Kremlin, I mean, there's an assumption normally the Kremlin is sort of a monolithic structure of which Putin completely controls, but actually it's riven by fractions. And within the Kremlin, there's a hardline fraction that thinks Putin hasn't gone far enough. And that fraction is nominally supportive of Prigozhin. And what this might do is, having made Putin look weak again, that it might foment a coup that people might actually more actively plan to oust him, to topple him. So maybe there's going to be at least a big shakeup in the Ministry of Defense. Shoigu might be ousted, generals might be changed, that Putin needs to reassert his control and has to revalidate his authority with the military. So we're going to watch very closely in the coming weeks to see what the consequences are.
Right, Mr. Aris, clearly this was a rare challenge to Putin's leadership, which hasn't happened in decades. But talk to us about the kind of concessions that Prigozhin received, which made him change his mind. Because reports reveal that Prigozhin had been planning to challenge the Russian leadership for quite some time.
Like I say, I mean, there's been this bitter feud between Shoigu at Defense Ministry and Prigozhin has or had political ambitions. And he put himself into a position where suddenly he was the hero of the Russian army. That, as I say, for the last 8 months, the Russian regular army hasn't been doing much fighting. It's just been building its defenses. And they were the heroes of Bakhmut. They were in the front line. They were laying down their lives in a very, very bitter and bloody battle. And they won. And for the Kremlin, a victory was extremely important for propaganda purposes, in so much as that Putin has to get the Russian people on board with this war. That most people think that the idea of attacking Ukraine, which has always been seen as our brothers, was a bad idea. But once the war had started, they buy Putin's line that they're in an existential proxy war against NATO. And here you've got Prigozhin in the middle of that, being the hero, actually delivering victories, the only victory that Russia has scored in the last 8 months since its huge defeat in Kharkiv. And he was hoping to leverage that reputation of being a nationalist, a hero of the Russian motherland, into some sort of political power. But this whole showdown, I think, has ended that. And so the concessions that he's got is simply that the charges against him of an armed insurrection have been dropped, and those against the Wagner fighters have also been dropped, and that he gets to retire to Minsk. And you have to bear in mind as well that the Wagner operation is not just fighting in Ukraine. It's a worldwide operation with big security contracts in Syria, in Libya, in Africa, where in exchange for his military services, it receives not just money, but mining concessions, diamonds, gold, oil, and is a very profitable organization. So I think Prigozhin will go and base himself in Minsk, but it'll be business as usual as a PMC. This is a business for his and an international business. So he'll go back to that, making lots of money.
Right. Absolutely, Mr. Aris. We'll have to wait and see how things pan out in Russia after the rebellion being called off. But thank you so much for joining us in WION and sharing your insights with us on this. Thanks very much.